Welcome again. I am continuing to walk through the generative algorithms using Grasshopper by Zuban Khabazi. Pretty amazing stuff, as you can see here. Pretty cool geometries. You can get creative with it. You can do whatever you want with it. It's going to be hard to find the exact iterations of what is pictured in the book, but it stems from some very basic script that he walks you through. And I'm going to jump into it off the bat. As I don't want to waste too much time, I'm going to put us back into shaded and probably just top perspective view of what's happening here. It's not too difficult. You'll see how I built the script. And even though the larger script, it slows down to 103 milliseconds, I could change the order of the linear array and I could have things move in the z direction, jittering to affect all of the surfaces instead of patterns of surfaces. But I chose to do the linear array after. Just throwing that in there so you kind of know what I'm talking about. I'm going to take the get rid of my pattern that's there, and I'm going to also work up to this script, which is a good way to learn, is start with a small script and slowly add to it. Just going to disable it and go to the first part of the script, and you're going to see starting off the bat, he's very repetitive in this. I'm going to enable it, and also I think my bifocals is active. That's good. Basically, he's going to build a series, nice and easy to start. You see a little bit of geometries here in the form of line, building a series through a step and a count, taking that into points, and the point system that is then moved. It's not too linked parametrically. You're just using your sliders to move it around to get different geometries. He pulls in a Boolean to find a pattern for the called pattern, which I think is amazing, to start thinking of data and points, to start weaving things together and putting things together, which is exactly what this section does. It is called tessellation and tiling, so think of the applications of that, what you do in Surface. I'm not much for patterns or things architectural or repetition or kernels of information repeated. I actually like to build things as kind of single entities, but this fabric pattern is pretty awesome to think about what would happen if you started to project the geometries onto non-planar forms and don't rely on the world flat plane. That said, I'm going to call out some information and end up calling this list of points along with this list of points and bring them together as a polyline. And you see the problem of what happens with that. So what he chooses to do is takes that script and I'll disable that one. He says, well, let's go back into it and see how we can remedy that. Enabling this one, he does a different thing. He goes in, makes the same series, grabs those points and those points. He calls them out into a pattern of these points and these points, but instead of just having them polyline directly together, which is what he did there, he brings in a very nice tool called Weave, which follows the pattern of what you brought in through the Booleans, which was true, false, false, true. Now, if you're wondering how I got that data into there, if you double click on my Boolean or you right click on my Boolean and you see how I set it, I typed in, actually I didn't actually set multiples to true and false by typing those in. I actually just typed in 1 and 0 and then hit commit changes because, as you know, 0 and 1 will relate Boolean right to true and false. Hopefully you know that. So anyhow, we bring those together and we get a much nicer pattern in this one as opposed to the pattern that was up above that kind of ran through the data, zigged across and ran back. The weave pattern is a very good tool to use. I use that a lot, and I use it a lot with the dispatch tool as well. We will disable, and we're going to go to the next script. So we're just flying through here, enabling. These are right off of here. And he has gone so far as to add a third point. That's all he did. He brought in a third with another slider, so you have the effect of moving these ones up and down to affect that. You can move these ones to affect that tessellation. And in the sense of doing that and using two woven patterns, he chooses this one, and he weaves those together into that polyline and that polyline. Now, once you have those polylines closed like that, it's not too hard to think, okay, what could I creatively do this? And he ends the demo kind of like that in the outline, which is free online. And yeah, I'm kind of talking my way through this as I build my scripts and make my own things. So what did I do to the script to make it a little more exciting for me? And it's just the beginning of it. I believe I have some cool ideas that I'm going to do. So right here we have everything. What I'm going to do is just take off these off and show you kind of how I ran the script. Actually, I might go so far as to take these off as well and preview off. So what we have here is I chose to take the same thing he did by finding points. I chose this set of points, this set of points, and this set of points. I found this pattern, and this pattern, and I wove them together into this pattern. Now if I put this on, you'll see this pattern and this pattern as I choose it. So it's nice to have it disabled, but if you put on view selected, you can override that kind of disabling it. So even though nothing shows up, you hold out shift and collect the two. And I simply, before pulling them into an extrude, those items into the extrude up, what I wanted to, before I pull them into a extrude farther down, I actually just mirror those. So I take that data, and I bring them into here and mirror them on the Z plane. So that brought them over, and then I was able to take this data, bring those together so they actually mimic what's happening here, and then make surfaces out of that set, and merge them together so I have both patterns. I then go into what I do so often, and I should probably fix this up, took them through a linear array in a y direction after an extrusion that was jittered, that followed the z-axis, went through a range with its function of x, special expression of x minus 1, which you see there. I have a seed that can change everything in its extrusion, so as I seed through it, you can see things jump and change wherever I want. I have a list item of how many items are in there, which is 34 items, and I've managed to grab that data, and then that goes through a domain that I choose the height of what that domain will be, and since I didn't want any not to exist, I put the minimum start of the domain at 0.1 all the way through to 1. You can change your scales to make sense, but really this kind of thing that I'm doing here is so common to my practice. And I just want to bring it over here to say I do this so often on almost every transformation I'm doing. I've actually started to consider what could I do with matrices instead of having to get into making all these kind of scripts that do all of this. I think I'm actually going to settle into finally committing to matrix transpose matrices and dealing in a 4x4 matrix, pulling in information. Sorry, not that one. Pulling in the where is it? I thought it was there. Yeah, it should bring a matrix and show me the data. How do I show the data to those things? No, well, I've got to input one, but it would come up as data that I could assess and change and then reinstitute into another matrix. That's getting ahead of me, but basically I'm getting tired of doing all this just for simple rotations that have such an effect on jittering and changing. I'm going to see if I can work that together. Needless to say, all I did was take that through the domain, chose in the linear array what direction I would put it through, and if you follow this, I just have to follow my data back here. Woo. All the way. Oh, I decided to keep it parametric, so I actually chose, let's just shrink this down, put on all my items, take them all off, and let's make all this script visible. Review on, so you see what's happening. Basically, on the sense of getting a count, I brought that all the way back to the list length, so whatever list length comes out to go across this way, I also want that to be the list going up, and of course I could take that count, which is sitting at 34, and I could divide the linear array by just setting an expression node of x and make it more square, x divided by 2. Watching my time here, committing. That should squish it down to about a square, which is what I actually wanted to do. And then my direction in y was actually following that back, which is always nice to do. I made that parametric back to the height of how I set the y. So if you recall these points, how far do I want to move those y up? I could also take this over here as that y direction as well. But I decided to use this number. And in keeping that all parametric, as I start to change and move these things, you see I have a real effect. And even though the script slows down a little bit because I put the linear array after the extrusion, I could find other ways of flattening the data to deal with all the points so there isn't this consistent pattern of stretching. But I don't actually mind it. I think it's kind of cool. And the closer these numbers get together, well, as you play with them, you should get flatter and fatter objects that are extruded on top of each other. And I don't know, makes for a pretty interesting pattern that you can then start with your Rhino and what you want to do with it. This data, before you do any extrusions or too much, I think you should consider how you would project it on other surfaces as points and see how you can make it flow over other forms when you get into some really cool morphing tools here. But your script's going to really slow down when you do that. So hopefully you're following what I'm doing. We're up at about the 10-minute mark. I'm following through the tessellations, and I'm going to continue with Zuban Khabazi, which is just incredible stuff to take a look at and walk you through. And then once again, I have these cool little tiny scripts that I can jump into and say, okay, I like that called double weave pattern. And what I said before is grab that and I'll put that on enable just so I have it there. And I will take this script and I will put it on disable. And just one more thing I like to do is I think of that little script, and that's a cool little, pattern, double woven pattern. So I will just take that and I will select it all, go up to my snippets tool, which I've downloaded as a plugin. I'll go into Wickerson Studios Digital Assets. I will say double weave, weave snippet 008. I don't know why I'm calling it 008, but that's what I'm calling it. Actually, I shouldn't. I should just call it my first double weave pattern because I'll probably only do one. Let's do one and hit done. And now, as I go into it and have that off and not under preview, I can always, on a blank script, say this is a new one. I can just go up here and grab my little tiny digital assets, double weave pattern, throw it in, and there's my script to be used and playful and have some fun with it and make these lines more parametric or change them up, change the count, simple pattern to start, and then reapply it in other situations. I actually am interested in just doing one thing here, interpolating this weave. Yeah, and interpolating this one. I think that would be a nice pattern, and it may make for different things that don't join together. But if I took a look at those two items there, I might get lucky. And I'm just playing around, and that's what this is all about. I might merge that data in here and that in here, and I could get lucky and I could fail terribly here, but that's what it's all about. Bring that up and see if they're connected. There you go. You have a nice little script of something more fluid with the interpolated curve. Let's just take off preview. And there we go. We've got something that actually does some pretty cool little sine, cosine edges down here. And those would be hard to draw and make perfect in Rhino, but they're pretty easy here to just script a little bit of a weave pattern and using something a little better than maybe these two nodes, which I turned off. That's it. Thanks very much for watching, and I will save that as another file and continue on the tessellation page. Great generative algorithms. Learn the basics, learn the fundamentals, and start to get real creative with this stuff. Hopefully, kind of walking through it, getting it online, having something in front of you. I answer a bunch of little tricks that I use that aren't really in the handouts and solve some of the problems that maybe reading the paper you get head up against. And you didn't notice there's little subtleties that had to be appreciated. All right, thanks very much.